Hi everyone, warm welcome to our Trade Talk Go Canada today that we are hosting with Norrbotten Chamber of Commerce. Swedish companies have many reasons to expand to Canada, and it's the world's 10th largest country or economy with 37 million residents. During this webinar, we will be listening to leading experts that will tell more about internationalization and Canada as a market, and how Swedish companies and other Nordic companies can enter the Canadian market. I will shortly introduce our speakers for today, and then I will shortly also tell about our Chamber of Commerce and how we work with internationalization before that. We will first listen to our expert how to do business in Canada from the Nordic perspective with Jukka Matikainen, that is Managing Director at the Nordic Trading House in Canada. After that, we will have investment and business opportunities in Canada with Magnus Almen, that is Senior Investment Officer for the Nordic region at the Embassy of Canada in Sweden. And then we will go over to successful market entry to Canada with Kristina Kigren, that is Country Manager, and Patricia Bögg Jensen, that is Project Manager at the Business Sweden in Canada. At the end, we will have some takeaways and conclusions from today's webinar with my colleague Helen Sundqvist, that will help me to moderate today's webinar. Just some short words about our Norrbotten Chamber of Commerce. We have 3 focus areas. It is infrastructure, international trade, and business and competence and networks. We have been working a lot with export in different ways. We have had close cooperation with Finland, where we have also worked towards the Canadian market with both Swedish and Finnish companies last year, and therefore also, for example, with both Business Sweden in Canada and the Nordic Trading House in Canada. Our regional export cooperation consists of amount of different Swedish actors that help companies with internationalization. And due to that, I would like to share a short video about our export cooperation in Norrbotten. I Norrbotten är vi duktiga på att samarbeta. Vi har långt till marknaden och långt till varandra, men vi har nära till människorna. Jag är övertygad om att vi blev nominerade för årets exportregion på grund av att Norrbottens företag har varit väldigt duktiga på att ställa om under pandemin. Vi har haft en stark exportutveckling under många år, även innan pandemin. Jag heter Sabrina Syki. Jag jobbar på Norrbottens handelskammare som samordnare för internationella affärer och ansvarig för regional exportsamverkan. Vår regionala exportsamverkan har ju den unika fördelen att vi kan jobba även gränsöverskridande mot Finland och Norge. Våra exportföretag i Norrbotten består till största delen av små och medelstora bolag. Naturligtvis har vi också stora aktörer och vi har mycket spetskompetens inom olika områden. Den gröna omställningen är ju en tydlig sådan. Men sen har vi också batteribältet och rymd och biltestindustrin som till exempel har funnits i Norrbotten sedan över 50 år tillbaka som är väldigt viktiga. För att lyckas med sin regionala exportsamverkan så är det viktigt att ha örat mot marken, lyssna på företagens behov och ta in också omvärldsbevakning för att veta vad som händer, vad finns möjligheter, vad finns utmaningar. Samtidigt som det är viktigt att inte se varandra som konkurrenter utan mer som komplement till varandra. Och det tycker jag att vi är extra duktiga på. Vårt nästa steg i regional exportsamverkan men också i det gränsöverskridande som vi jobbar mycket med mot Finland och Norge är att fortsätta jobba med de kluster och spetskompetenser som vi kan se i våra regioner som har en konkurrenskraft förstärka den och också korsbefrukta dem med varandra över branscher och över gränser och över klusterna och också vara mer konkurrenskraftiga tillsammans i internationellt sett. Great. I would like to give the word to our first expert, Jukka Matikainen from the Nordic Training House in Canada.
Thank you all, and good afternoon and good morning to some people who might be here in North America. So for the next 30 minutes, I will be talking about business development in North America and in Canada. During the presentation, I will bring up many observations that I have made both here in Canada and Europe, where I have worked. I have done many projects with people from Scandinavia recently and in my previous roles, and I have tried to highlight the most critical observations. There are some people in the audience who have a sales background, so matters will surely be in some extent familiar to them. Some of these things do not apply only to the North American market, but are universal. However, the significance of these points I raise may be more important here in North America, where competition is tough in many ways. So the goal of this presentation is to provide insights on approaching business development in North America and to share observations that can help overcome challenges and obstacles in expanding business here. The first area of focus is how to find new customers and a brief discussion on sales channels. The next area is business culture. And the third area of focus is communication, presentation, and sales techniques. Before jumping on the chapters, I will give a quick introduction on my background. So most likely, most of you haven't heard about us. We are a small company based out of Vancouver, Canada. We're a team of 5 people, and we help Nordic B2B companies with their business development needs in the US and Canada. My background is in sales, marketing, business development, and corporate strategy. We have done dozens of business development projects and market research projects for Finnish and Swedish companies and organizations in many industries. For example, construction, mining, seaports, clean tech, forestry, EV charging, and so on. So here are our customers from the past couple of years. Approximately 40% of the projects have been for the Canadian market and the rest for the US market. The customers are typically small and medium-sized companies with revenues ranging from a few million to several hundreds of millions of euros. In addition to projects to private companies, we have carried out various types of projects for the public sector, including benchmarking activities and other types of market research projects. And then we have hosted lots of delegations and made travel arrangements for them. We also have a 4-year consulting agreement with Business Finland for research in forest bioeconomy, clean tech, and seaport-related matters in North America. I would like to say a few words about myself. So I have a background in industrial engineering and a master's degree in business administration with a focus on finance. About 12 years ago, before moving abroad, I worked in UPM's corporate strategy department, where I did lots of projects on researching new business opportunities. Since then, my career has taken me to Australia, England, and Canada, and my career started in strategy and business development, then moved into product marketing, and after that I transitioned within the company to technical direct sales, a role here in Vancouver, and in my last role I worked for 3M, where I was looking after some of their distributors in the automotive sector. So now it is time to move on to the actual topic of the day. So typically, my clients are Finnish SMEs or some Swedish, and then some governmental clients who have decided to explore or enter the North American market. They usually start by asking if we have experience in their industry and ready contacts. After a brief conversation, the client realizes that it is very unlikely to find such a person who has direct contacts with their ideal customer companies, especially with the individuals who make purchasing decisions. So someone might have some contacts, but they're not the Nordic company's ideal customers. So therefore, finding customers is a process. So many Nordic companies start by participating in trade shows and hope to get a few leads from there. However, trade shows can be expensive, and it is a gamble whether they will generate leads and, more importantly, convert them into customers. So that's why I advise considering a different perspective. So do you want customers who happen to walk by your booth, perhaps lured by candies or free pens, or would you rather allocate resources to finding and contacting the most suitable customers for your business in North America? So there are various challenges typically involved in finding new customers, but there are a few of the major ones. So firstly, resource allocation. Undertaking such a project is a time-consuming exercise. Nowadays, everyone is busy, and often these tasks falls on the sales team. The second challenge is related to data acquisition. So the world is full of information, but finding the right information can be difficult. We may find potential customers, but how do we know if they are the best ones and most suitable ones? So a systematic and comprehensive approach is crucial, but it can be quite challenging for someone inexperienced or new to this. So defining information needs and knowing the availability of different types of information is also invaluable. And once the information is found, how to compile it into spreadsheets from multiple sources can be a task itself. So processing information also requires expertise, tools, and time. So almost regardless of the industry, there are thousands of potential customers in North America. So nowadays, there is a lot of information available on platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Yellow Pages, YouTube, magazines, company websites, and so on. So the question is how to find the right ones and prioritize them effectively. So typically we gather preliminary information, partially through automated means, and then later on in the project, lots of manual work is required. So depending on the specific customer cases. So let's take an example. So there's approximately 33 million companies in North America, and 1.2 million of that number are Canadian companies. So those are rough numbers, but giving you an idea. So in one project, we found roughly 1,000 companies that met our high-level criteria for prospective clients. So how loosely criteria are set should depend on your company's sales process. So it is crucial to define precisely what you are looking for, because it's a huge market, and how to segment them and how to prioritize them for the sales team. So you have to consider all those factors. So if the process is properly done and customers are prioritized, typically in the end of the process, there will be roughly, it can be 20 customers or 500 companies, depending on your type of business and the industry. So this is quite obvious that you can always try to do projects on your own, but the end result may be not as good. So it's worth considering when it's reasonable to do it yourself and when it's better to let professionals handle it. When it comes to tasks like segmenting and prioritizing those potential customers, it requires expertise, resources, and systematic approach, as I mentioned. And those will ensure accuracy and effectiveness. Also, access to a wide range of information sources is very, very important. And there are so many different information sources available for North American markets. So as mentioned earlier, it's also important to consider where to allocate the company's resources. So the time of salespeople is valuable, and especially if you are flying in, flying out, so it's costing money. So it is not worth using it for a project that takes a few months. So it is probably better to have the sales team focusing on what they are most valuable for the company, which is obviously sales. So our process for finding customers consists of 6 stages. It all begins with defining the information needs, determining what kind of companies are desired to be found and what information is sought about them. So the next is the creation of a long list. A large number of companies are gathered that could potentially be customers. Then unsuitable companies are eliminated and the remaining ones are segmented and prioritized. And lastly, contact information is sought for the selected companies. So let's dive a bit deeper into this process by through a case example that we did for North American market. So sometime back, we conducted a project for a group of sawmill companies, and we were searching for customers on the East Coast of the US, but the approach would be the same for the Canadian market. So the first stage is defining the information needs. So it all starts with defining the ideal customer, what criteria determine an ideal customer, and how are customers segmented and prioritized. So typically, basic information about companies is desired, such as website, address, revenue, and business type. So in addition, additional information can be extracted from the product portfolio. For example, when selling lumber, it is important to know if the prospective customer already deals with the similar product. Other aspects of the customer can also be defined, such as whether they claim to be innovative, if you happen to sell new technology. So what kind of production technology do they claim to use? Are environmental concerns emphasized as important values? And lastly, decision maker information is important. So who is the most relevant decision maker? What contact information is desired, such as LinkedIn, email, or phone number? So it is important to consider what is relevant and prioritize efforts accordingly. So this way, the project workload and budget can be managed effectively. And also in addition to all those factors, you should think about the geography. It's a huge country, and if you fly from coast to coast, it's something like 7 hours. So we have a huge geography, lots of companies. So maybe you choose one of the provinces to start with, or a few of them. So the next step is creating a long list of potential customers. So depending on the information needs, relevant data sources need to be considered. They can be paid or free. So in this project example, we found and evaluated approximately 8,000 potential customers who might be interested in buying lumber from Nordic countries. So from that initial pool, a final database was compiled, considering of 200 highly prioritized customers and nearly 500 companies belong to other interesting segments. So eliminating irrelevant customers is crucial. So it is important to establish criteria for filtering as the project progresses. For example, revenue can be a convenient metric as it is objective. So defining clear criteria for filtering and prioritizing customers helps to streamline the process and focus on the most promising prospects. So in addition to revenue, many other criteria are applied to ensure efforts are focused on the most relevant and highest potential customers. So next is, it is beneficial to segment the companies. Segmentation is crucial from the perspective of sales and marketing, and it should follow the company's established practices for segmenting customers in other markets. So in this example, there may be segments such as agents, traders, manufacturers, building material wholesalers, etc. So next comes to the prioritization stage. So the project generates a large number of potential customers, but not all customers are equally interesting. Therefore, it is important to prioritize them. It is also advisable to carefully consider prioritization from a strategic perspective. So do you want to easy deals, big long-term customers, the most profitable customers, highest volume customers, and so on? So in the case of sawmill example, the assumption was made that if someone is already importing similar lumber from Europe, why wouldn't the customer consider purchasing Nordic lumber as well? Therefore, understanding the product portfolio and the target market was crucial in the project. Once the customer had been prioritized, it is time to find the decision makers. So depending on the business, but in this lumber project, purchasing managers were sought. So if they were not available, other executives were targeted. The desired information included title, name, email, phone number, and LinkedIn profile. So searching for this information can be time consuming, so it is important to carefully consider what is truly needed. So a few words about distribution agreements. So distribution agreements are often a critical part of enabling success. And these agreements entail obligations and rights, as we know. So like in any successful relationship, it must be a win-win situation. It will come to an end. So on this slide, a few common challenges that often arise are listed based on my experience here in North American market. And I would say that there are lots of similarities to other markets as well, if not even the same. But the principal wants to add too many distributors and too quickly. Getting rid of bad agreements is difficult. So even when results are not achieved, distributors often want the exclusivity, which is in most cases is a poor option for the principal. And what happens if the agreement is terminated by the principal? So does it lead to legal disputes? So I think those are very important things to consider and try to think ahead of time before writing those agreements. And as a small tip, starting distribution with Amazon Business before other channels can be beneficial. So I know that you have Amazon in Sweden, so you are to some extent familiar with it, but we have also Amazon Business. So look that up, and if done the other way around, it is likely to upset the distributors. So this I really recommend to look into this first and then open those distribution channels first if it's applicable to your business. So check that out first. So now let's move on to the next section, which is business culture. So a little over 2 years ago, there was a news article that is a great example why understanding local culture is important. So I bring it up as an example to illustrate that even being a citizen, but also born and raised in Canada, doesn't necessarily ensure that you understand the business culture in your own home country. So some people might think that after doing 20 business trips helps them to understand the local culture. It is some extent untrue, so most probably that's not the case. But in this news article, it is reported how the CEO of Air Canada gave a speech in English in the province of Quebec. And as some may know, Canada is a bilingual country and Quebec is a French-speaking area. So as a result of the speech, a major controversy arose and there were strong demands for his resignation. So the CEO made a somewhat thoughtless comment regarding the language issues, and significant consequences can arise from relatively small matters, or at least they are, as a European, it can be perceived as a small matter, but in this case it wasn't. So in this case, he was able to keep his job, but he needed to start taking French lessons, and that was how he overcame the challenge, and he was able to keep his job. So cultural differences are often underestimated, and understanding or misunderstanding them can have a significant implications, as I mentioned just a moment ago. The challenge lies in the fact that only some aspects are visible or easily observable. So such as clothing, language, etiquette, laws, etc. Those are easily observable. So these aspects can be learned relatively quickly, even during business or leisure trips. However, this is just scratching the surface. So values, traditions, beliefs, philosophy, ethics, morality, life purpose, and other deeply rooted cultural factors are more difficult to perceive. So these elements shape the way people think, behave, and perceive the world, and they require deeper understanding and appreciation to navigate cultural differences successfully. So when it comes to conducting business abroad in a foreign environment, in order for the business to run smoothly, we must understand each other. So in addition to understanding, we also need to learn to live with our partner from the other culture. So it is indeed challenging to learn to understand one another, but learning to live with the other party is even more challenging. And I'm referring to the distribution agreements here. So we can either try to change the local culture or try to adapt ourselves to the local culture. And I have often heard Europeans being labeled as a bit arrogant. Partly this stems from the technological advancement, a sense of superiority, and communication shortcomings. So if a client starts feeling inferior or similar sentiments, it is not a good starting point for collaboration. Therefore, I suggest trying to understand why things are done the way they are. There are usually reasons behind certain practices, although not always. It is better to build upon knowledge of history. Doing things differently doesn't necessarily mean better or worse, but rather just different. So understanding the other party is important because it demonstrates professionalism as a collaborative partner. So in many industries, the mindset is quite different from Europe. And here is a general example of how things are perceived differently. In Europe, people laugh at the ridiculously large cars people drive in North America. However, there must be some reasoning behind it. After all, people are not foolish here either. One of the best-selling vehicles is the Ford F-150 shown in the picture. It may sound crazy, but there are several reasons for this, apart from the status symbol. For example, the vast distances and harsh conditions necessitate a durable vehicle. If it breaks down, it is better to have a quick access to spare parts and skilled mechanics. Moreover, Nordic cottage culture doesn't exist here in the same way. And instead of trailer, travel is the thing. So if a family has only one car, it is better to have a versatile one. And gasoline is cheap, so it doesn't matter if the car is fuel thirsty. It is also important to remember that the population in North America is of European descent, and over the years they have learned to adapt to the local environment. So in this picture, the differences between the West and East are depicted. In the West, things are more casual, while in the East, they are more formal. So leisure time is emphasized in the West, whereas work is emphasized in the East. And these same findings apply to Canada. Perhaps a couple of more notable differences that I have observed. Canadian mindset towards risk-taking is more risk-averse compared to the US. This naturally has an impact on the speed of deal-making. So the time is money mentality is more pronounced in the US. In Canada, customers don't necessarily tell you that they are not going to buy from you they try to avoid hurting feelings, or they want to be polite, or something along those lines. So quite a big difference between those two countries. Now I'm generalizing a bit, but I have discussed with many of my friends, and these are sort of verified or findings that I validated through my networks. Also, Canadians are more humble compared to Americans. So as the final topic, we have communication, presentation, and some sales techniques. So one of the most significant areas of development I would highlight is communication. So in this aspect, one can never be too good. It is important to remember that Canada has a population close to around 38 million people. Their backgrounds are diverse, and salespeople should speak to them differently, so considering their background. And phone conversation are a whole different challenge. So the risk of misunderstanding is even greater. Due to the language barriers and small nuances, misinterpretation can easily occur, or people may perceive the other party as rude. So it is crucial to remember that they draw conclusions based solely on what they hear. Your words and tone of voice is very, very important. So intonations or other emphases placed on specific words are extremely important. So compared to Europe, it is indeed much more important to focus on how you say something rather than what you say. So based on my observations in Finland, about 80% of the weight is given to the content and 20% to how you say it. So monotone and neutral speech is quite normal. In North America, however, the weight of things can be perhaps 50-50. In this example, there is seven-word sentence where the meaning changes drastically depending on which word is emphasized when spoken. So in North America, I have noticed a mentality where people tend to buy more from someone they like rather than solely based on raw facts. That's why I want to say a few words about friendliness. Additionally, I want to mention a few words about the silent signals. Things are not communicated very directly here, so in friendliness and especially in soft skills, we are always a bit behind the locals. That's why we need to outshine them in our substantive expertise. So developing our soft skills requires effort, and we should try to close the gap as best as we can. Could, would, and please are extremely important. Conditional and please in the same sentence, just to be sure. So it's also even more important in England, but in Canada it is sort of some extent similar. Small talk is important, and if you are a good enough communicator, adding some humor can be effective. Canadians and Americans overall enjoy laughter and smiles. When conducting sales presentations, using a storytelling approach is important. So additionally, the presentation should be educational. The communication should be consultative and dialogic rather than just a lecture style delivery. Here is a highly recommended book that I suggest reading. It introduces a sales approach based on educating the customer. So check it out, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. In presentations, it is important to focus on customer benefits rather than just the product features. Benefits should be quantified whenever possible. So unfortunately, it is not often seen in practice in many presentations that I come across with clients. Active listening and asking relevant questions based on the customer's needs are crucial in sales, and it is important to truly understand the customer's requirements in order to provide appropriate solutions. So put more focus on listening and less in talking, and dig into the customer needs and pain points, and then provide the right solutions. Like I always refer to doctor examples. So if you walk in to doctor's office, and if they are handing out without asking anything painkillers, maybe that's not the best approach. So try to apply similar principle with your clients. Ask more and then listen carefully. So that's end of my presentation. Thanks for taking the time, and I'm handing over back to Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Jukka. Very interesting, and we see a lot of synergies between the Nordic companies and the Canadian and North American companies. And it's a pleasure to have you here today, since we also have been working with you both with the Finnish and Swedish companies of the northern parts of Finland and Sweden. I would like to give the word to Magnus, but I will share the presentation first. You're so welcome. Magnus is our expert from the Embassy of Canada in Sweden, and will talk about the investment and business opportunities in Canada.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about Canada. And thanks, Jukka, for a very interesting presentation. I absolutely agree with your comments on the business culture and the differences between West and East in Canada. I would just nuance a little bit the comment about Quebec, at the risk of so that we don't want to put anybody off Quebec. For an executive like the CEO of Air Canada to do a speech like that in Quebec and not do it in French is an absolute faux pas, as he should have said. But for anybody coming and looking to do business in Quebec, not so much rural Quebec, but in Montreal, for sure, it's not going to be a problem if you don't speak French. For any sort of official launch, it's good to speak to French, to stick to French, but you can absolutely conduct business in English. I don't speak French myself. It's rarely been an issue in my job. I deal with people in Quebec a lot. Anyway, briefly about myself. I'm a Senior Investment Officer for Global Affairs Canada, based at the Embassy in Sweden, as you said, Sabrina, but I cover all of the Nordic markets. And my job is to drive investments from this part of the world into Canada. The companies that would otherwise consider the UK, US, Germany, wherever, it's my job to make sure that Canada is on that map and hopefully help you land in Canada. We are, as an organization, the Trade Commissioner Service sits under Global Affairs Canada, and in a Swedish context, it's convenient to compare ourselves to our friends at Business Sweden. There are some fundamental differences, but basically the same mandate in driving export from Canada into the rest of the world, which is what the majority of the organization does. But also, thank you, Jukka, but also foreign direct investments from the rest of the world into Canada, which is, like I said, what I do myself. Right, next slide, please. So this is just a little map that I like to begin with, and it shouldn't before, but to sort of present the scale of Canada. It is an absolutely humongous country. 38 million people is significant. It's a big market, absolutely. But in terms of geography, it is massive. So you see, I've placed, if the purple bit looks familiar, it's Sweden can fit into the province of Quebec about 2.5 times. And Sweden is not a small country, as you're all aware. So it's a very, very big country. I don't want to make anybody feel that it's a daunting prospect. And Jukka mentioned this as well. It's good to approach Canada in portions, to focus on a province, focus on a city, and which one to focus on will depend very much on what kind of business you're in. If you're in ag tech, you may want to look at Saskatchewan, for example. If you're in ag tech, you would look at either of the coasts, especially Nova Scotia. I see, by the way, that New Brunswick is missing from this map. My apologies if there's anybody from New Brunswick on this call. Actually, go to the next slide. So it can be a little bit. Could you change the slide, Sabrina, please? Yeah. So this shows briefly the FDI ecosystem of Canada. So first of all, I should mention Canada is a confederation. So I sit on the federal level with Global Affairs Canada, but then there are 10 provinces and 3 territories, each of which has, so there's 10 provincial governments, each of which has an investment promotion agency, and a lot of the cities have investment promotion agencies as well. So my job is very much to, in conversation with companies, such as companies on this call, looking at what kind of business you're in, drivers for investment, to look at where in Canada might make more sense. And then in conversations with people in the provinces and down to the cities, gather all the data that you need to make that intelligent decision of where to set up. So we will typically send out requests to various provinces and cities to come back with a deck for you to have a look at, and that will answer all the questions that you have about that will be important for you to know when you make a decision on where to be based, and obviously benchmark that against other markets that you may be looking at as well. But this can seem like a bit of a mess sometimes, and it is. But we work very closely. I work very closely with all of the provinces and cities and everybody has the same goal of having a Canada first approach and then trying to win investments for their respective territory. Next, please. Okay, so this list could be very long. I've deliberately kept my presentation on pretty high level because I don't know who exactly is on the call. I could have made this more specific to an industry or sector, but I'm going to keep it pretty general, and then happy to answer any questions after the presentation, of course. So, why Canada? Market access, stability, sustainability, competitiveness, and talent. These are sort of the 5 major points that I've chosen to build this presentation around. So let's start with the next slide. Market access. So Canada has a history of being a progressive trading nation and very open to trade. So currently has 15 trade agreements covering over 50 countries, and as you can see, a huge amount of customers worldwide. So some of the key ones are CETA, of course, with the European Union, CPTPP with a number of nations in South America and Asia Pacific. And of course, a big one, which used to be called NAFTA, sometimes still called NAFTA 2. From a Canadian perspective, it's called CUSMA, the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement. USMCA, I think, is the more common acronym that you will see. But basically, the free trade agreement with Canada, the US, and Mexico, which is absolutely crucial, of course, for Canada in being a big trading nation, and the US being the absolutely most important partner, of course. An excellent transportation of infrastructure with seaports, land ports, rail across Canada and into the US, and of course, air cargo as well. So you can really, with a base in Canada, companies have access to the world through all of these trade agreements and through the transportation infrastructure. And of course, a lot of companies set up in Canada to have access to the US market. And we see increasingly companies based in Canada, but before they're based in the US, so especially software companies can service the US market from a base in Canada. And there's various reasons why they choose Canada with the US, and I will get into that a little bit later in the presentation. Next, please. Stability, perhaps not the most exciting subject, but it's I think increasingly important. Some of these. So economic fundamentals. It's a very stable country. It's got one of the strongest projected growth rates in the G7. It bounced back fairly quickly from the pandemic in terms of employment rate. Of course, Canada is not immune to inflation. We see it everywhere, but the numbers are relatively low. I think it's around 6%, 7%. It has the lowest debt in the G7 for about 50 years. It's a very solid economic fundamentals. And the financial system as well, very stable banks. The top 6-7 banks in North America are all Canadians. You don't see, there's been some turbulence in the American banking sector lately. You rarely see this in Canada. Political stability is not something I used to speak about 5-6 years ago, but it is an important aspect for the long-term view. And I think, especially for Canada, in having the currently have a federal liberal federal government led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as you know, and then across Canada, these provincial governments that I mentioned earlier, it's a mix. There's liberal, there's Bloc Québécois, there's conservatives, but what you will find is that when it comes to business and openness to foreign investments, nothing fundamentally changes with elections. So as an investor with a long-term view, you can rely on being able to conduct business in Canada in a safe and stable way, regardless of who's in power. Quality of life is another thing that I didn't use to talk about. This is a key part of the pitch for my colleagues in other parts of the world. Typically, I will find that when you have Canada, I think it's number 3 on the list of best places to live. Sweden tends to be either just above or below. But I think it's an important aspect to keep in mind as an easy country to feel welcomed in. It has to do with the alignment on business culture and just values in general. It is essentially, if you as companies set up in Canada, open an office, and need to bring key staff over from Sweden to open the office, it's typically not difficult to get people to want to move to Canada with their families and live there for a bit or for a long while. So it is still an important aspect. Next, please, Sabrina. Just some numbers. So, yeah, it's an easy country in which to do business. It's easy to incorporate and start doing business. There's different ways to do that. You can incorporate provincially or federally, not a massive difference, but it can. If you incorporate provincially, then you have a license to operate business elsewhere. But typically, at least clients that I work with will incorporate federally, so we can do business all across Canada. It has the best educated workforce in the world. Over 60% of Canadians have some kind of post-secondary education. Steady population growth. Canada grew by about 400,000, just over 400,000 citizens last year. About 2/3 of that is labor immigration. So the Canadian workforce, the talent pool is growing, and the target is about 500,000 new Canadians every year. Solid support for R&D. There's federal science research and education tax credits, often a provincial tax credit as well that you can stack on top of that. There's various grants and incentives, especially for clean tech and zero emission technologies. And there's something called the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is the federal government's vehicle for the typically larger projects of long-term strategic projects, where typically around big R&D projects in Canada, where federal, provincial, and company co-funded in consortiums. And competitive tax rates on corporate tax rates around, I'm not going to say the number completely, I forgot the number, but it's I think 20. I'll get back to that if anyone has questions about specific tax rates. But it's a competitive. There's no major impediments to do business in Canada. Next slide, please. Sustainability. So this has become a big one, as Sabrina, you mentioned the green transition earlier. And as companies look to go green and decarbonize in various ways, Canada has become a very attractive market for various reasons. But first of all, the Canadian government itself has ambitious targets to be net zero by 2050. So it's quickly rolling out new clean technologies. So there's big investments in onshore and offshore wind and solar, specifically in Alberta, not least. Very big solar parks are being under development. Fuel cell and hydrogen technologies, CCUS. There's lots of different areas in this case with interesting big projects across Canada. So opportunities for companies in that space. To begin with, Canada has a very clean grid. So you have huge access to hydro in Canada. So provinces like Quebec, Manitoba, British Columbia are nearly 100% hydro, especially Manitoba and Quebec. Have a big in Ontario is a significant part that's nuclear. Very similar mix to what we used to in Sweden and Finland, but If the choice is between Canada and setting up somewhere in the US, then this is a very competitive advantage, where a lot of US states still rely on coal and gas for a lot of their electricity generation. So we see companies that are in any kind of manufacturing that is looking to decarbonize are definitely looking to Canada. It's a very good place to be. Green incentives, not least with the budget that came out in the spring. There were new tax credits for battery production, for hydrogen production. This is very much a response to the US Inflation Reduction Act that was released last year. And so this was very much Canada's response, and continued to be an attractive destinations for this type of investment projects. Mines to Mobility is very interesting. It's a strategy to attract investments into Canada's electric vehicle battery supply chain. So anything from extracting minerals to processing to cell manufacturing, actual EV assembly, and all the way through to recycling. So Canada is already a major automotive industry. So there's 5 OEMs in Canada. You got Honda, Ford, General Motors, Toyota, and Stellantis. So there's a significant automotive industry in Ontario, specifically, about 700 auto parts suppliers. So that's already there. All of these 5 OEMs have announced production of EV electric vehicles in Canada. So the strategy in Mines to Mobility is the vision is to have these companies produce vehicles in Canada where everything from the raw material to the finished product, everything is produced in Canada. So it's possible to do this. Canada is the only place in the Western Hemisphere that has all the critical minerals, metals, and rare earths that is needed to produce batteries. The automotive cluster and the know-how is already there. The clean grid is there to be able to do this in a very clean way. A lot of the processing of the raw materials is done in China at this point, and just back to Canada. But this strategy is all about bringing those investments into Canada, and it's not just on paper. So this picture here shows something called Project Arrow, which is it was the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association of Canada brought together, I think 54 members came together to show that this was possible to do in reality. So this is a car, an EV that exists, that is 100% done in Canada using Canadian raw material processed in Canada. This is an extremely expensive vehicle. I think it's something like $2 million. So it's a prototype, but it shows that it is possible. And in the long run, this is efficient to have the entire supply chain in Canada. So next slide. Okay, talent. This is my favorite topic. So I already mentioned the best educated workforce in the OECD. Some really great. So starting there, you already have a good talent, homegrown talent pool coming through top universities. So Canada has a very loud neighbor to the south, as you're aware. I think people on this call will be aware of Harvard and Yale and Princeton and MIT, etc., but less familiar with McGill, McMaster, University of British Columbia, University of Toronto, but fantastic, great universities producing about 500,000 graduates every year. And traditionally, there's been a history in Canada focusing on STEM and R&D capabilities for about 130,000 STEM graduates every year in Canada, and a total pool of nearly 3 million people that have that type of that graduated from one of these programs. So there is a huge talent pool for companies to tap into in Canada for that type of jobs. Diversity is also a key strength. I mentioned the hundreds of thousands of people coming to Canada each year. Over 200 languages are spoken in Canada, aside obviously from the main languages of English and French. And in a place like Toronto, where actually over half the population of Toronto is born in a different country, you can find any skill in basically any language. So for tech companies that need to do sales and services support globally, you can find anybody that you need in Canada and service the world from there. So it's a huge strength for Canada. It truly is a country of immigrants. The Global Skills Strategy is a federal government program which has been created to make it easier and quicker for companies based in Canada. So these could be subsidiaries of Swedish or Finnish companies to bring in talent from overseas. So there's a recognition there's a huge and rich talent pool in Canada, but there are specific jobs, especially where the government has recognized that you cannot have too many of these. So there's a program within the Global Skills Strategy called the Global Talent Stream, which is a list of jobs, all of them related to software in some capacity, or computer engineers, statisticians, mathematicians, software developers, etc. That as an employer, you don't need to do what's called a labor market impact assessment, which you otherwise need to do in showing that a Canadian couldn't do the job that you are posting. You don't need to do that with these jobs because it's just recognized that, yeah, we need to bring in more people like these. So you can do that very quickly in about the target is 2 weeks. It's sometimes quicker, but around 2 weeks to get a work permit for these people and bring them in from anywhere in the world, provided obviously all the other necessary paperwork is in order. And there's also a program called the Dedicated Service Channel, which I've used with clients from here, which is a concierge service through IRCC, Immigration, Refugee, and Citizen Canada, where companies that make a substantial investment in Canada have a dedicated desk officer within IRCC to help out with the paperwork and making it easy to bring in people to Canada. So this is something that has been not least used by US companies that need to bring in people from overseas, and it's been too difficult to do that in the US. So they've set up offices north of the border, not necessarily because they need to, not necessarily to service Canada, but it's simply easier to bring in people from the rest of the world to Canada than it is to the US. Next slide, please. I think it's just a brief overview of some recent announcements. Exactly. Just a few examples of Swedish companies that have set up in Canada in the last couple of years, or last year. So AstraZeneca, was British, Swedish, announced an expansion of their research hub in Mississauga with some 500 new jobs focusing on rare diseases. So this is very much a result of the access to talent, but also some of the R&D incentives and grants that exist within Canada. Mentimeter is, you may be familiar with, a Swedish SaaS company that is a rare case, at least up until recently, of a company that set up in Canada as a first location outside of Sweden. Typically, they would have gone through the UK, US, and somewhere else, but they went straight to Canada, opened up with 8 people. I think they're currently 40 and looking to be 150 in a few years' time. So they're doing very well in Canada and servicing the US market from their office in Toronto. Klarna announced an engineering hub in February of last year, creating 500 jobs when they're built to capacity. This was their first engineering hub outside of Europe, and also very much done to tap into the talent in Canada. Ericsson announced in April a project through the Strategic Innovation Fund that I mentioned earlier. So this is a R&D project along with the government of Canada, creating a couple of hundred jobs in Ottawa and investing $500 million over the next 5 years. Centiro is a company out of Borås that opened in Montreal, speaking of Quebec, in last year, and starting small there, but growing very well. They actually had previously, or still do, but they had an office already in Boston, but had some issues in bringing talent in to the US market. So that was very much a reason why they decided to also set up in Canada. So that's about it from me. As I said, it's a high-level overview. Happy to take questions. Happy to set up a follow-up meeting or call to discuss in more detail what kind of business you're in and what you might want to know about Canada, and I can explain a bit more about how we do. But that was that was what I had to talk about today, and that's me and my contact details if you need to reach me, and of course very easy to find on LinkedIn as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magnus. Really interesting to learn more about from your perspective also, and great to hear also that you're working from the Nordic perspective, as Jukka told in the beginning. So we have a lot of synergies. I would like to introduce Business Sweden as the next speaker, and it is Kristina Kielgren, that is country manager, that starts, and then Patricia Bögg Jensen, project manager, will come after her also and tell more about Business Sweden in Canada.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you, Jukka and Magnus. I don't know what possibly more I can tell you, because the two of you covered a lot of different aspects and very good points on Canada. And so I will do our presentation, but we will overlap a few of the information there, but it might be good for a repeat as well. But I am, as Sabrina said, I'm the country manager for Business Sweden. I am located, or our office is located in Toronto. But I'll give you here a little bit of an overview who Business Sweden, who we are. And our mission is, of course, to help Swedish companies to grow global sales, but also to support international and foreign companies to invest and expand in Sweden. We are a truly global organization. We are present in over 40 markets and growing. We have opening up a few more offices. We actually just announced this week we will be opening up an office in Ukraine. But in Canada, we have an office in Toronto. In US, we have 4 offices: San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. We are an organization with about 500 employees and growing. That's about 50 more than we were a year ago. We've been around for about 50 years. And we are 50% owned by the Swedish government and 50% owned by the Swedish industry. So quite a unique setup. So what do? We help, like I said, Swedish companies to grow their international sales. And we do that in many different ways, such as market expansion, sales acceleration, business to government, and another service we have is business incubation and operations. Something that Business Sweden is quite unique with offering that type of service, where companies can rent office space from our offices abroad. They can utilize our staff to do their finance, controlling, employment, HR services, and incorporation. And that's a popular service in North America. Our office have about 35 Swedish companies that are using that service. But otherwise, we help Swedish companies with their global expansion strategy, market entry, and even merger and acquisition sometimes. We work as business management consultants. We do charge for our services. However, we do also have a lot of subsidized services for small and medium-sized companies, and I will tell you a little bit more about that later. This is our office in Toronto. There's 8 of us, led by myself. I have lived in Canada for over 30 years, been with Business Sweden for about 25 or more, and I've been in this position for the past 3 years. But we have an amazing, talented team with many different backgrounds, both Swedish, Canadian, and from other countries as well. So we have been here also for about 50 years. And the industries that we are focusing on, where we see synergies and also opportunities, are the mining industry, forestry, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and food and retail. And we will talk a little bit more on the mining industry. My colleague Patricia will talk about that. So just like Magnus said in his presentation, Canada is a large country in size. It is covering 5 time zones or 6 time zones. It takes about 5.5 hours to fly from east to west. And as you can see there on the map, Sweden, you can sort of fit it into Quebec, but Quebec is 2 times or 2.5 times is bigger still. So it is a country, though, with many similarities with the Nordic region and with Sweden, such as the weather and the love for hockey. I can say that just like Jukka was talking, it's good to have some small talk. Hockey is always a good conversation piece to talk about hockey players in Sweden and Canada. Everyone knows the Swedish hockey players like Salming, Mats Sundin, Alfredsson, Sedin brothers, and so forth. But yes, I'm not going to go on more about that. There are similarities, but size and population is 2 things that are different. So just like Magnus was mentioning, why are we why Canada? Why is Canada an attractive market? And I think Magnus brought up some really, really good points that we have on our list as well. Free trade agreement. We have the CETA agreement between Europe and Canada. It's the most comprehensive free trade agreement in the world. And is beneficial for both Swedish and Canadian companies. 2 companies that are culturally similar, both in business and socially, as well as the 4 seasons and the natural resources. A government that provides a lot of incentives, and especially for R&D. And Magnus did mention some of the investments, but a lot of companies are investing more in Canada because of that, because they have that government support. And the talent pool. Yes, Canada can boost with a very strong and diverse talent pool. I often talk about how Toronto has 51% of Canada, Toronto's population comes from outside of Canada. And Magnus mentioned that as well. Very unique and celebrated, I should say. The integration has been well done in Canada. And then we have the gateway to the US market. Of course, Canada and US are very integrated when it comes to trade. I think about 78% of Canadian export is going to the US. So, of course, very dependent on the US market. But US is also dependent on Canada. So very integrated, but it is a gateway for Swedish companies wanting to tackle the North American market. Starting in Canada is a very good thing. And we see that often Swedish companies start their operation in Ontario, in Southern Ontario, and then grow the business and then go into the US. And I know, for instance, Mentimeter that invested and opened up an office in Toronto a couple of years ago. The reason why they choose Canada was because of the talent pool, the diversity, stable economy. But their clients were actually in the US. But they decided that we want to have our office in Canada. And then political stable government, democracy, minimal civil unrest, and all that. But I think Magnus covered that as well. I think I'm going to skip this. We talked about the CETA agreement. It is the most comprehensive trade agreement in the world. It's been in place now for 5-6 years. The highlight, I think, from that is the tariffs that were taken away. 98% of the tariffs were eliminated, and that had an impact on certain sectors. Every year we ask Swedish companies in Canada how their business is doing, something called the Business Climate Survey. We've done that for 4 years in a row now. And Swedish companies' view of Canada is that they are making a profit in Canada. It's a fair and sustainable place to do business. I think 67% of the Swedish firms actually plan to increase their investment in Canada in the next coming 12 months. So I would say that the Swedish companies have a really good footprint in Canada, and they are doing well. Oops. How do I go back here? Let's see. There. So I just want to mention some of the industries where we are a little bit more proactive, where we see similarities between Sweden and Canada. And as I mentioned before, forestry, mining, advanced manufacturing, consumer goods are 4 of those sectors. Canada has a large forest sector. Almost 10% of the world forest is in Canada, and it is the 4th largest forest product exporter in value. The mining industry is I mean, here Canada is a powerhouse when it comes to mining. Over 200 mines. We have all the minerals and metals, or many of them, in the world. And Patricia will tell you a little more about the mining industry. The advanced manufacturing is strong in Canada, especially in Ontario, and is ranked 5th on the Automation Readiness Index. And then the consumer goods and retail. I think Canadians have a really good appetite for consumer goods from the Nordic region. Interior design, clothing, and brands are well liked and in Canada. Just want to mention there's about 100 Swedish companies, a little bit over 100 in Canada. Many of them have been here for a long time. Ericsson is celebrating their 70th anniversary this year. They opened their office in 1953. Same thing with Alfa Laval, ABB, SKF. They have been also here for a long time. But then we have newcomers as well. And we did a survey a couple of years ago to see what is the economic footprint of the Swedish companies in Canada. And we found out, we didn't have this information before, but we found out that close to over 37,000 jobs are created by Swedish companies in Canada. And that's quite significant, and it makes a difference. If you also count the indirect jobs that is creating, it's over 100,000. And the largest companies you can see here on the page is Securitas, IKEA, Volvo, ABB. This is by employment numbers, I should say. The figures will be a little bit different if you look at the revenue. Yes. And then, just like Magnus was saying, and I'm highlighting some of the great news that has come out in the past few months, Swedish companies are investing more in Canada. AstraZeneca have announced that they will expand their research and development facility in Mississauga, hiring 500 highly skilled scientific and high-tech jobs. And that is linked to the fact that they have there's a big talent pool in Canada. And Ericsson also announced that they are going to invest over 500 million. Okay, someone changed the slide here. And then lastly, but not least, Nova Bus, part of the Volvo Group, They won a 2.2 billion contract with the province of Quebec for new electric buses. So they will be building 1,230 electric buses in North America. That is the largest public tender in North America. So congratulations to all these three companies that have done really well and made some really cool announcement lately. Okay, next slide. I will hand this over to Patricia. She's sitting across the table here. Mm-hmm. We are actually in Sudbury right now, and Sudbury is the mining hub in Canada, just like Kiruna is in Sweden. And we are attending a conference called From Mine to Mobility. So just like Magnus was talking about, Canada has all the ingredients for the whole value chain for the mine to mobility. And this is a conference that are combining those two sectors, the mining industry and the automotive industry. So we have been listening in to speakers from Vale, Glencore, those mining companies. Today we have listened into speeches from Honda and Ford and a lot of other organizations, because there is a big buzz, I would say, around this whole, the battery value chain, the electrification of the mining industry. So we are here, we're sitting in a small room. Patricia is across the table, but she will take over now and speak a little bit more about the Canadian mining industry.
Yes, thank you so much, Christina. Yes, so as Christina mentioned previously, mining is one of our focus area here at Business Sweden, and especially in Canada, of course, being such a big mining powerhouse. So I just wanted to provide a bit of a deep dive, to provide a bit of a background on the mining sector in Canada, as well as its importance. So as you can see very briefly, just to give you a quick scan, mining industry is one of Canada's most important economic sector. And it's also a major job creator. So it actually stands for even 5% of the GDP, calculated on direct and indirect GDP. And looking on the mining industry from a more sort of global perspective, there's a lot of investments going into Canada to the mining sector. And it is actually the top target for many regions around the world when it comes to foreign direct investments, as you can also see in the sort of lower graph here. Looking at the production in Canada, then, Canada is the #1 producer when it comes to potash. But not only that, Canada in total produces over 60 minerals and metals. So as you can imagine, it's a lot of mines in Canada, a bit over 200, as you can see here on the slide, and over 100 different type of mine operators from all around the world. And just to sort of piggyback over what Christina said in regards to the Mines to Mobility conference that we are currently attending, Canada does produce and have all the minerals and metals required to manufacture battery electric vehicles. So Canada is currently building out that sort of whole value chain from raw materials processing being done in Canada, as well as manufacturing of the battery electric vehicles, and have the capacity to do so. Looking at the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is the 10th largest exchange in the world, 50% of the global mining and exploration companies are actually listed on the TSX. So it's a very mining sort of heavy stock exchange, if you will. I think we can maybe move over to the next slide here. Thank you. So as Christina mentioned quite a few times, and I think you have a pretty solid understanding of that now as well, is that Canada is a mining powerhouse, and that's specifically when it comes to the resources, so what it has in the bedrock, as well as the sort of technological development. And as you can see on the map here, majority of the mines are in Quebec and Ontario, so sort of in the eastern part of Canada. It is a mix of both underground mines and open pits. So it's a rough 40-60% mix, if you will. And Canada's mine both metals and non-metals, and that's a rough 50% mix, just to give you an idea in terms of the distribution. Canada also has very deep mines, just like you might find in Sweden. A bit deeper, though, I have to say. The deepest mines, some of the deepest mines in the world are located in Canada, and They have 3 mines that are just below 3 kilometers. So we have La Ronde, which is in Quebec, as well as Kidd Creek and Creighton that are based out of Ontario. And just to enforce further how important Canada is in terms of its mining industry, Canada is actually home to 75% of world's mining and exploration companies. So what that means is that these companies would have their headquarters in Canada. And then looking at the sort of technological development that Canada is currently doing in the mining industry, Canada is actually paving the way and taking the lead when it comes to mine electrification. So we do have Borden mine, which is a fully electrified mine when it comes to a production fleet based out of Quebec. And then we have the Onaping Depth project, which is going to be the world's most modern underground mine, and it's going to be fully electrified, of course, and will be in operations in 2025 and based out of Ontario, just to give you a little bit of a background. And looking at the right-hand side here on the slide, we can see just a few sort of a snapshot of some of the mining companies that are currently present in Canada. And again, as you remember, it's over 100, so this is definitely not an exhaust list. This is just a few examples, and I'm sure that you recognize many of these big mining operators. But we also have quite a few Swedish OEMs that have a big footprint in Canada. You can see at the bottom slide here, just Epiroc itself have over 2,100 employees just in North America. And I think we can move over to the next and final slide for the mining industry. So this is just to show you that Canada has players across both public, private sector, as well as academia. So you would see associations, both on federal, but also on provincial level, R&D hubs, as well as innovation centers. And then, of course, we have a few other key influencers, that we like to refer them to as. So we have, for example, NORCAD here that I want to highlight, which is a technology testing and demonstration facility, sort of an innovation center. So as you might imagine, Canada has a very large mining ecosystem with all these different players, as well as the resources in the bedrock, of course. So that together builds up for Canada's reputation as a large mining nation and mining hub. But yeah, I think with that, I'll maybe hand it back over to you, Christina, to talk about one of the major events that we have in the pipeline this fall.
I want to mention the Sweden-Canada Innovation Day that we are organizing in one more slide back, please. It's happening on October 4th in Montreal. This is something we organize every year. It's on initiative from Vinnova. Vinnova has given us the task to organize it. And the overall theme is driving the green transition. And this is giving Swedish and Canadian companies a platform to network, present, and meet. So we did that in September of last year in Toronto, and now we will do the same thing in Montreal. So let us know if you want to have more information about that. And like I said, we did it last year. We had 130 people attending. About 60 people came from Sweden, 24 speakers, 11 startups, and 5 Canadian corporates. It was a highly successful event, and we are looking forward to do this event again. Next slide. I think we'll skip that and then go to the next one. As I mentioned in my introduction, we do have some programs for Swedish startups that are tailored to help small and medium-sized companies subsidize services, export coaching, export validation, export project, promotion activities, and export rules and regulation. Some of them are completely free of charge, and some of them are subsidized by 50%. So please let us know if you're interested. We can tell you a little bit more about those services. And our last slide, I just want to emphasize on some takeaways that Swedish companies should think about when they are looking to Canada. And I think it ties in very much with what Jukka and Magnus have said in earlier. Plan to build long-term relationships and to be persistent. Don't give up. It takes time. We also often talk about the additional layers of government complexity. The fact that we have many layers of government in Canada can sometimes be a little bit cumbersome, but it is like all the provinces are very independent, and there could be laws that are different in each region. Also understand the need for the market and your company fit. I think Jukka talked about this a lot. You need to understand the market before you enter it. So do a lot of homework. Be aware of appropriate legal requirements that might be valid for your product. Another thing is Canadians are risk adverse. I think Jukka talked about this, and we see this all the time. So bringing data, bringing statistics, business cases, and research is a really good thing to do when you're in dialogue with Canadians. And lastly, but not least, focus on your Swedish heritage. Canadians trust Swedish brands. It stands for quality, loyalty, sustainability, not the least. And I think here is the fact that Sweden has a really good footprint in Canada because of that. And I think there's lots of opportunities. I know that Canadians and in particular Canadian government is looking to collaborate with like-minded countries, and Sweden is definitely one of those countries that they want to work more with. Okay, I think I managed within my time. I think we're a little bit delayed, but happy to take some questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you to Jukka and Magnus and Patricia for saying everything. I just want to say that this will be also available on the web so that you can look at it later. I'd like to invite you all to offer 3 takeaways for doing business in the Canadian market. So if you want to start, maybe Jukka, you can give your 3 most important takeaways.
Okay. So I would say that the communication is a key. So it takes practice, but the communication, if you don't know how to communicate, there is no way that you are going to succeed here. And I think, as was earlier mentioned, the data is a key, so that we have lots of opportunities here, but how to find the ones. And I think the data is a key for that too. So, and I think leveraging the high technology what we have in Nordic countries, and I think there are lots of opportunities for that, but it's not easy to sell. The market is a bit cost driven at times, but there are opportunities, and let's try to sell the next generation technology by educating the customers, and data is also key for that.
Thank you very much, Jukka and Magnus.
There we go. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say just don't forget that Canada exists. I find that a lot of companies do, and it's not always on the roadmap of especially as companies start looking. You know what the US is the big prize, and a lot of the time companies forget that Canada is fantastically located to be a test market for North America and to be a stepping stone into that market, but also to so remembering that it's there and it's not as far away as it might seem. I think we could have mentioned that. So starting last year, there's actually direct flights now from Stockholm to Toronto, which I'm personally super happy about because my wife is from there and I've connected through absolutely everywhere. But so it's not as far away as one might think, but at the same time, obviously, it's not as easy to cover as the UK, where you can pop in and out over the day and do some meetings. So do you have do your homework? There's people on this call that you can contact to have a conversation and get an idea about where might be a good spot for you to set up in Canada, but then also go and visit and meet with people and see what it's like, and leverage your network. Again, some people on this call that you can consider a network already. I find that founders from the Nordics that have set up in Canada, and or people that work for them that are from these markets and have set up in Canada and came over to build the operation, they're super happy to speak with other companies that are looking to do business in Canada and learn and share lessons learned. And then I'm going to be very cheeky and just steal the one of the things that Christina said about the hockey diplomacy, because this is something that I don't tend to do myself. And I've been across Canada to all the provinces, and saying that on Swedish, this comes up all the time, and I don't know hockey players very well, so I found that to be that could have been a superb icebreaker, but I failed on that point. So lesson learned, and I'll share that with all of you. So please do your homework on that as well.
Pun intended with the icebreaker and hockey reference.
I did not think about that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we can take it over to Christina and Patricia, do you have takeaways to give?
Yes. My first one would be know your hockey players. Like very good conversation to start with. Absolutely. It is a massive country geographically, and companies need to focus maybe on one or two areas. Don't think you will cover all of Canada within the first year. So start small, start with an area, with the province, and build from there. It is a bilingual country, so take that in consideration. I think we've talked about that as well. And but it is a country with like-minded views and resources. So there are lots of opportunities, I would say. So I think, and more, it's growing. We see more business, more collaboration between Sweden and Canada. So putting Canada on the map, yes, and I think things are happening on both sides, where we see that collaboration is happening. So yeah, I would say the future is very bright and promising for Canada and Sweden.
Thank you very much, Christina.
Patricia, do you have any takeaways that you want to close with?
No, I think thank you. No, I think Christina pretty much covered it all. One thing that stands out to me, though, as an addition to what Christina just said, is that Canada and Sweden has very similar industries, prioritize similar industries like the forestry industry and the mining industry. And there's actually, where we are right now in Sudbury, there's a very large Finnish population, because they came here in the 50s to relocate, and they had the skills and trades required within forestry and mining. So again, there's a lot of similarities between Sweden and Canada. Obviously, everything that was mentioned prior to this, but as well as the industries. And Sweden has a lot of skills and trades within this. So it's worth highlighting and mentioning again. It's a good complement.
Great, thank you, Patricia. I would like to finish with some concluding slides at the end. So I will just share my screen one more time. I would like to thank you, all of our participants, for today's Trade Talk, and also the ones that will be watching this afterwards, when we will put it on our website and also on our YouTube channel. So you will be able to watch it again if you want to. I would also want to say a special thanks to all of our experts from Nordic Trading House, from the Canadian Embassy, and from Business Sweden. It has been a pleasure to be working with you, and I hope that this webinar also connects more companies to get the advice and help from your organization when coming to the Canadian market. Canada is a large market, and we have a lot of similarities, as we have heard from the experts today. And since we have been talking a lot about the hockey, that was also one of my final slides, actually, because we have Canadian players also in the team Luleå Hockey here in Sweden, in northern part of Sweden, like Brandon Shinniman, that is playing at the Luleå Hockey, and also JC McWood, that is coming to the Luleå Hockey for the women's team playing. But we also have a lot of Finnish players like Jenni Hiirikoski that is playing here, and also a lot of big names, as Christina also mentioned earlier, like Saku Koivu and Börje Salming, that has been playing in Canada. So that's a really good conversation started, and always something that we can share a lot of experience from, at least right now, Canada is in top 2 in both of those World Championships. Please feel free to contact all of our experts from today's webinar and connect with them, but also contact us at the Norrbotten Chamber of Commerce, and we'll see what we can do to support your journey at the Canadian market. So thank you for Trade Talk Canada, and thank you for everyone participating today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.